Hi St. Peter's, happy Monday. Today's reading is from John chapter 11, verses 28 to 44. I'm just going to read verses 38 to 44. Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is an odour, for he has been there 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." We see in this story the power that Jesus has over life and death. It's his biggest miracle yet. Martha has protested that it's far too late, but it is never too late for Jesus. And he calls Lazarus out from being cooped up in this place of death and darkness with a stone rolled over the entrance. He calls Lazarus out from this place into life, into wide open spaces. But what really strikes me about this passage isn't the resurrection, it's the grave clothes. John writes that Lazarus comes out with his hands and feet wrapped in strips of linen and with a cloth wrapped around his face. He's still wearing this physical symbol of death, even though he's been raised to life. And Jesus says this really beautiful thing. He says, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." And he physically removes this symbol of death. He physically removes those constraints. He sets Lazarus free. And a few chapters later, John writes about, again, some grave clothes. He writes that Simon Peter finds strips of linen and the cloth that was wrapped around Jesus' head. But Jesus isn't wearing them. Simon Peter finds them in the empty tomb. Jesus has left his grave clothes in the grave. Death has no hold over Jesus. He will never need grave clothes again. Death does not have any power. And so he leaves his grave clothes where they belong, and he walks out of his tomb without them. Like Lazarus, we are called into life and freedom and wide open spaces. We are a new creation. We are alive in Christ. But reading this passage, I had to stop and ask myself whether I'm still wearing my grave clothes. Am I really living like a new creation, or am I living as though I am still dead? It's very easy, particularly in moments of fear, to start reverting back to old habits, old sins. Perhaps instead of turning to Jesus, we've been turning to other things to calm our fears. We have not been living as though we are truly alive. But Jesus is so kind. And after doing this miraculous resurrecting work, after bringing Lazarus from death into the fullness of life, he removes that last constraint. He reminds us there's no need for grave clothes anymore. We are asked to leave behind anything which pulls us to the grave. We're called to rise and to leave our grave clothes behind, just like Jesus did. Even in the darkest and most hopeless places, Jesus calls your name, and he invites you to leave the grave behind and step into new